3.3 Stress, Anxiety and Arousal. From the scenario, it is suggesting that Nick is quite a stressful person at this moment of time. This is because he is worrying about his grades even though he is an A-grade student, as well as feeling nauseous before games, perhaps suggesting that he is nervous over it. Throughout the whole season, he has seemed to be stressed, and I'm going to talk about what stress really is and the effects of it on Nick. Lauren and Folkman said in 1984 that stress is a pattern of negative physiological states and psychological responses occurring in situations where people perceive threats to their well-being, which they may be unable to meet. This links to Nick's performance being poor this season, and the threat to his well-being may be him being the number 2 seed. Stress can also have the physiological effects of someone, such as an increase in heart rate. For example, when Nick is playing his matches, he may have a higher heart rate, which isn't just down to exercise, it's to do with the stress he may be feeling. Nick may also be having an increase in breathing rate, where his body may be panicking in a way that he wants to get as much oxygen into his lungs in order to try and calm him down. There are 2 types of stress: eustress and distress. Eustress is stress where people thrive off it, and it comes off positive. It is seen to be known as healthy stress, and it increases performance perhaps due to their thrive of pressure. An example of someone who has eustress is Cristiano Ronaldo and Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Regarding Nick, he doesn't seem to have eustress, as the performance drops when he makes a mistake, which puts even more pressure on him, which would increase his stress. This can be argued, however, in his grades, where school can be seen as very stressful. However, he is still performing well at school. Overall, Nick would be feeling distress. This is a negative part of stress, where Nick performs worse and worse as the stress increases. As you can see from the graph, eustress is seen to be the best way to increase performance, perhaps when it is a big game where pressure is on the table. And then when there is distress, you can see the performance has dropped a lot, which has happened to Nick. When someone gets stressed, there is a process towards it. This process was by McGrath in 1970. The process would start with a demand that has been given to the performer, which in this case Nick, and then the performer has to take in this demand, and they'll either take this positive or negatively. If this response is positive, they may thrive off this challenge and will create eustress, which will increase their performance. In Nick's case, he has taken a demand negatively and created physiological and psychological stress, such as being nauseous and increased heart rate. This would then lead to a worsened performance in his game. Thus, if he thinks negatively, he will play negatively, because perhaps he may not have the confidence to play well. Therefore, overall, Nick has distress, which can affect his performance, giving him physiological and psychological effects as well. Another emotion that Nick would be feeling is anxiety. This can be seen when it says that Nick is worrying about his grades even though they are high. There are a few definitions for anxiety, such as Buckwork and Dishman, where they said in 2002 that anxiety is a negative state of worry, apprehension or tension that often occurs in the absence of real or obvious danger. Typically, the tension felt by an anxious individual is accompanied by a heightened state of physiological arousal. This definition suggests that the person who feels anxiety have high arousal, therefore they might perform worse as they may be thinking too much and not playing in the way they need to. This relates to Nick, who has not been applying the tactics that he's been training to in the matches. Therefore, this could be because of that anxiety that he was feeling before the match, so he wasn't able to focus on his game. The anxiety that Nick has felt was the outcome of the demand that he was first threatened by this instance. And in this instance, it was the initial poor performance getting worse and worse as the season goes on. Perhaps to the attention he got, which puts that pressure on him. There are mainly 2 types of anxiety: somatic and cognitive anxiety. Firstly, there is somatic. This is to do with the physical side of anxiety. This is where the body makes physiological changes in order to keep up with their emotions. This could be an increase in heart rate, as I've mentioned before. It could be an increase in breathing rate, blood pressure, and other changes such as hardened muscles where they tense. These changes can change your perception of yourself and may cause panic and high arousal, which is caused by the somatic anxiety. Nick's reaction to the somatic anxiety is very negative as he strokes the cover with it and his performance decreases. Then there is cognitive anxiety, which is the psychological part of anxiety. It's all about the thoughts of the performer and how they cope with it, and how it can affect their performance. McNally said in 2002 that the negative expectations and concerns about one's abilities to perform and one possible consequence of failure, showing that it is all about the mindset of the athlete. Therefore, with Nick, his cognitive anxiety is affecting his performance as he psychologically not applying to what he needs to do. This can be seen by the coach trying to reassure him that he is good, as the coaches realise that Nick has cognitive anxiety and can see that it's affected his performance. This can be produced through stress. There needs to be a reason why Nick feels this anxiety, and it could either be through trait or state anxiety. With trait anxiety, this is where there is a natural feeling for anxiety that you've always had throughout your life, and maybe through genetics, where you just have that anxious mind. If you have high trait anxiety, it means you worry about almost everything you do, whereas low trait anxiety may worry only about a few things. It is linked to paranoia in the sense that even if you're not in a position to worry, you still worry. In Nick's situation, it seems he has got quite high levels of trait anxiety, where he's anxious about school and sport, even though he's good at both of them. The other type of anxiety is state anxiety. This is where the anxiety that someone feels at that current moment. For example, it could be someone who may feel anxious only for one cup match, which may be important for that, so it's only temporary. So with Nick, he feels state anxiety when he plays his games, and it seems to be quite constant, meaning he feels state anxiety quite a lot, which could be caused by his trait anxiety, as is natural for him to be anxious. Therefore, it is seen that in this scenario, the anxiety that Nick has felt throughout the season and how much it affected him in a negative way in his performance of badminton. Finally, there is arousal. Arousal is also a physiological and psychological effect of someone, as it can affect their performance. There are a couple definitions of arousal. One definition is by Weinberg and Gold in 2007, where they said that arousal is a general physiological and psychological activation varying on a continuum of deep sleep to intense excitement, meaning that when someone is aroused, they are always prepared in a way to react to something. Weinberg and Gold also said in 2007 that arousal is a blend of psychological and physiological activity in a person, and it refers to a level of motivation, alertness and excitement at that particular moment. Also saying that arousal is a lot of what you are feeling and what effects it have on your mind and your physiological state. Nick seems to be feeling quite aroused a lot of the time, as his worriness is creating that alertness and it is psychologically affecting him. There can be high arousal, medium arousal and low arousal, and it can have an effect on someone's performance. As this graph shows, low levels of arousal include emotions like boredom, showing that the performance is poor perhaps because they are bored and they may not have the motivation to try in their sport, resulting in them not playing very well. When the arousal builds up, players might start to become more interested in their sport, where they may want to try more to a point where they start to get excited to play it. This results in their optimum performance because they have that complete motivation to play well and would try their hardest. However, the arousal might get even higher, meaning that people may start to feel anxious and stressed. Near the end of the graph, it starts to decrease the level of performance and it becomes the stress zone. The stress zone includes emotions like fear, panic, anxiety and choke. This could result in mistakes in your sport, such as lacking confidence. As a result, the graph is showing that different levels of anxiety affect your performance. With Nick, it seems that he is feeling stressed and anxious, meaning that he has high arousal, and that is the reason why he's not playing well in badminton. Therefore, if Nick wants to improve his performance, he will need to decrease the level of stress and anxiety and start to feel excitement in the sport instead of nervousness. Somatic anxiety can influence Nick's arousal, as the physiological changes to his body may make him panic, as he's not used to that fast breathing rate and blood pressure increase that is caused by stress. Therefore, this increase in arousal This increases his arousal in a negative way. Cognitive anxiety also influences arousal as well, because as cognitive anxiety is psychological, so all the negative thoughts that people feel, such as not having the confidence and being anxious, therefore that would also contribute towards arousal. As a result, it is seen that your somatic anxiety plus your cognitive anxiety equals arousal. This shows that Nick has very high arousal as he has high cognitive arousal anxieties, such as high somatic anxiety, which is feeling nervous. So this has negative effects on his performance and does not play. For arousal, there has been many theories to describe it, and the first one is the drive theory. It was by Hall in 1951, and as you can see from the table on the left, the drive theory is showing that if your arousal increases, your performance increases. This is a very simple theory, as it is only showing one thing. If your arousal is high, it means your performance is high, whereas their emotions may be fearful and anxious. This theory was developed by Zanyok in 1965, where he said that the presence of others affects someone's arousal because there is a bit of competition and people want to have a dominant presence. This theory may work for people such as professional footballers who seem to perform their best when their arousal is high. This is because they might have the mindset to try and challenge themselves and getting out of their comfort zone, so they may have that anxiety and fear, but they thrive off it. For example, a player like Cristiano Ronaldo has very high arousal, but he turns it into a positive thing, and it motivates him to perform well to the point where he doesn't feel like that anymore. So the positives that the drive theory has is that it's true in some athletes who are elite and perform well when their arousal gets high. However, the drive theory does have some criticism. One criticism is that people cannot handle the overload of arousal where they feel anxious, and it causes their performance to worsen, showing that the theory does not back this up. Many people criticise this, as this theory assumes many things such as low arousal means low performance, when people may play well even though they are not highly aroused. This theory doesn't really support Nick, as he is highly aroused, however is not performing well in his game and is making mistakes. This shows that this theory can be wrong. Another arousal theory is the inverted U theory. This is shown in the diagram on the right. It is different to the drive theory in the sense that when someone's arousal is incredibly high, their performance drops. This theory was by Yerkes and Dodson in 1908, and it shows that there is an optimal level of performance at a medium level of arousal. It is suggesting that when someone is at a low arousal, they don't perform well, and if they have too high arousal, they don't perform well either. It is saying that you need a certain amount of arousal to obtain that optimum performance, not too high or not too low. It is curved, showing that there is a gradual increase and decrease in performance instead of a straight drop. This theory, however, does have some criticisms in the sense that people do not always play their best when they are at optimum arousal, where you could say that those like Cristiano Ronaldo who seem to perform better with higher arousal. And it may not also be a gradual decrease or increase in performance, as some emotions can affect people in different ways where it can completely affect someone's performance either positive or negative. This theory relates a bit more to Nick, as he seems to be over-aroused and it is negatively affecting his performance. Therefore, there is some evidence this theory as the overload of arousal is what causes the mistakes and that lack